Alexander of Macedon by Harold Lamb. We're still in chapter 15, which is the first within part 3, the Blight of Luxury. Now, before anybody gets confused about the title, let me just remind you that everything is a test. Wealth, poverty, ease, hardship. No particular material circumstances by itself entirely blessed, as you could say. Presently, or cursed. Presently they discovered a city. Here simple folk made fine red pottery and cups of thin gold. These people had never seen an army before. This city the Macedonians called Zadrakarta. Kind of sounds like Zadzakzin or something from like the Enochian name for the first human. Modern Astrabad are Gurgon, and they marveled at the fertility of the land, sloping away to a river winding through limitless grassy plains, or so it seemed. No wine grapes were cultivated here, but the Macedonian farmers knew the soil would be good for such grapes. They rode out a little to explore the prairies, reveling in the high, lush grass that changed color as the wind blew. Still, they thought such vast plains to be unnatural after the narrow valleys of Macedon. On one of these excursions, some wandering barbarians stole a horse with its keepers, and nearly precipitated an attack by the whole Macedonian army, for the horse was Bucephalus. Alexandros sent messengers out to the prairies, with warning that if the black horse were not returned, he would burn the tents of the nomads. Bucephalus was brought back and peace restored, but the commander stationed a permanent mounted guard along the river to guard against future raids of the nomads. A wall built along the mountain ridge by the site of Zadrakarta in latter times was still called Alexander's Wall, although the Turkmen tribes today call it the Red Snake, because, built of reddish stone, it winds over the slopes south of the Turkmen steppe. Protecting from Gog and Magog. But actually, Kurush was said to have built that. And there's evidence to back it up that it doesn't go to Alexandros' time, but Kurush's time. Curiously enough, another wall built by other hands on the far side of the Caspian near the town of Darbend. Darbend. Darbend is is Kurush, yeah. Is also known as Alexander's Wall. The story goes that he built it to keep out the destructive tribes of Gog and Magog. The Sakyas were by Kurush, the king of two horns. While Alexandros rested his men, he gathered information about the lands to the east, and what he heard excited him immediately. Here the people knew nothing of the western regions of the Mediterranean. They called the Macedonians Yunani. They faced east, as it were, towards the Ashkenazis, the great Scythian horse-breeding tribes, toward the eastern pasture lands of the mighty Nisaean horses. If Alexandros kept on to the east, they said he would be on the track of the ancient Aryan migration, from the land of the sun, the land of Kurush. If he continued on, he would reach twin rivers flowing out of paradise, the river Sands and the river of the sea, just as he had passed the twin Tigris and Euphrates. Some stuff got attributed to Alexandros Magus, so perhaps we're talking about not only the one wall, but both walls being of Kurush. And Euphrates. By passing these rivers, he would come within sight, if he endured so long, of the greatest of the mountain ranges, towering above the timberline, above the level of bird life, dwarfing these hills around Zadrakarta. Those mountains were the Parapanisades. Promptly, the Macedonians started towards this goal beyond the horizon. Yet, every consideration of strategy and caution should have led him back to Ecbatana to organize his immense imperium. The Greek scholars put away their maps, and the scientists settled down to the task of orienting themselves in an unknown region, for the Persian officers had only a vague concept of what lay beyond Zadrakarta, and couriers speeding back to Ray and the base here at Ecbatana with orders for routing reinforcements eastward brought word that Alexandros had started east into the limbo of the world. It was, they whispered, the act of a madman. These common soldiers understood much that was never taught in the schools of the philosophers. They could see no reason for going on. Now, the important thing about philosophy is method. Not that you're quoting a bunch of philosophers like some non-thinking conservative religionist might. Oh no, I've lost my point. Uh, oh, they could see no good reason for going on. It seemed to them that Alexandros felt within himself a mystery of circumstances that no human leader can control, as if he were driven on by a fixed idea. Here frontiers had vanished. In no point did they find themselves, as in Greece, at the established limit of a land. The caravan route passed over eastward, twisting among the bare red hills that they called the Taurus. This Taurus itself led ever upward towards the heights so vast that in a day's march the men around them, now not for familiar landmarks, but for a sign of anything homelike and natural, an abandoned shrine or a bit of ivy growing, pushing forward against icy winds, they tried to determine where Alexandros might be in advance of them, and toward what destination he was struggling. The cold bit deeper than the winter chill of the Aegean, oh, the the Aegean, the Aegean lands. He's building more Alexandrias, said the couriers. Back came odd specimens to be transported to the coast. The terebinth tree, from which aromatic juice flowed when an incision was made in the bark. Turpentine. And silphium, that smelled even stronger. Asafoetida. You know, it's like silphium, but it's like the most sulfuric herb in the world, I think. But supposedly it doesn't give the bad breath when it's cooked. So for the Brahmin class in India and some other priestly class that are forbidden to eat onion and garlic and chive and that sort of thing, they can eat that. And if it's cooked, they, are. If they're doing certain types of magic, then they don't cook it. And it just has this strong smell like they're bringing hell down into the ritual chamber. Out of these juices, the physician said, balm could be made. Back also came sheets of thin, transparent stone that you could hear tear in your fingers, and goats with silky hair. What the guards along the caravan road asked the couriers was Alexandros doing. He was lying down to eat on a couch of gold. On his helmet, instead of the plumes, he had put 2 white birds' wings, resembling eagles' wings. He had paid honor to a masterless tribe for no other reason than it had aided a former great king, Kurush. Well, that's something to look up to if it's Kurush, though. Daredaus, not so much. When he was alone, he burned incense in the tent, climbing the gigantic ramp toward the earth's top. As the soldiers christened the heights ahead, they began to run short of supplies because in winter, this was the winter of 330 to 329 BCE. So there was a range that they were looking at, or a series of winters actually, because this Alexandros had a lot of work to do. These heights offered little sustenance. They had to piece out their barley and goat's cheese with mule meat and silphium. It was the first time that they had suffered from hunger. They were within what is now Afghanistan, near the northern frontier. While they burned tamarisk, taking shelter behind rocks from the ever-buffeting wind, they watched the crescent moon disconsolately as it passed over bare summits. The Lady of the Beast might be riding the moon chariot in that sky, transparent without clouds. Dust and dried dung swirled around them as if demons were dancing. They did not like it. You know, what's not to like? No, I'm kidding. The jinn can be pretty frightening. They saw no men. The towns and the people, the cattle and the dogs were hidden away somewhere in the maw of the earth's top. At times lights flickered as if spirits were mocking them, but when they ran out to pursue the torches, they fell into gorges they had not seen. Evil omens manifested themselves up and down the line. Craterus was wounded by a javelin through his thigh while he hunted a giant lizard on foot. Some of the witnesses of this accident related that the lizard was actually more like a dragon. It may well have been a servitor of the Lady of the Beasts, because after the javelin had hit Craterus, the semblance of a dragon had disappeared into the sheer face of a cliff. The soldiers sulked over this bit of news because Craterus had become their favorite. Now, sometimes spirits will give people experiences that are sort of crazy and lead them to hurt themselves, but it's not that these beings of another plane are actually physically hurting people. So if we don't give them the power, but people can literally be strapped down and psychosomatically. But if their beliefs and their consciousness don't allow this, it doesn't happen. Well, they'll still be strapped down by the humans that strap them down, but evil omens. Insensibly, Alexandros had begun to use the dynamic Craterus more often in contacts with his veterans because he himself saw less of them now, and the older soldiers liked Craterus because he kept all his Macedonian habits, refusing to consort with Asiatics. Hephaestion, on the other hand, absorbed Iranian ways and talked eagerly, and Alexandros used him now in dealing with the growing Asiatic elements. This had the natural result of setting the brilliant Craterus in conflict with the good-natured Hephaestion. Her protégés disagreed sharply and inevitably on matters of camp routine and foraging. Moreover, many of the Iranians would eat no flesh of a dead animal. It's even more common now that that's a belief among them because, the majority of them at least claim to be Muslim. Whereas the Macedonians, by now, could find little to eat except the flesh of sheep and lambs, eked out with pungent medical sulfium roots. When rations ran, short tempers flared, and once the two companion commanders clashed openly. Alexandros arrived on the scene, gave Hephaestion a dressing down, called Craterus aside to argue with him, and then brought his lieutenants together to embrace and pledge friendship. I swear by Yumen Ra, Alexandros assured them, that if there is one more quarrel before the phalanxmen, both of you will be executed, or at least, he added cautiously, the one who starts the quarrel. After that, two commanders were careful to be civil, and all they said to each other, but by then commanders and men had other troubles to think about, because the attacks had begun. Like the winds of the earth's top, these attacks were sharper than anything the Macedonians had experienced in the west. Horsemen raided out of ravines and vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Guard posts along the road were stalked and wiped out at night. When the regiments advanced into the hills to retaliate, they could find no enemy, nor sign of cattle and sheep herds, except tracks in the ground. It seemed to the men that the mountains themselves were arming against them. Actually, they were meeting for the first time with the resistance of the land itself. The nations here were against them. These Aryan mountain peoples, like the Macedonians themselves, had known no military yoke. They regarded the Macedonians as European invaders, aliens, and infidels. Infidels is more like a Western word that wasn't used there and it wasn't used back then. People of different faiths? Yeah. Like there was this folk song that kind of translated that I saw a video. Careful, careful, you foreigner. Careful, careful, you foreigner. You might go to hell. I don't know if it's actually, you know, a common song or anything like that, but or one that anybody but that old man would know, but that's how it translated, which I thought was pretty cool. By now, Baton and Diognetus said, the Macedonians had put nearly 1,000 miles by road between them and Ray, the last great city of Persian officialdom. Alexandros could not make use of his great persuasive powers upon these tribes, because he could neither assemble them nor talk to them. On the other hand, two of the satraps, who had killed Thraeathaush, had escaped hither into their own lands in advance of him to organize resistance. One of them was caught presently in a village, and Alexandros, driving through in his chariot, stopped to question him. Why had he slain the great king, the descendant of Kurush, and his own blood kin? I was not the only one to slay him. Alexandros hesitated, then ordered the prisoner to be stripped and a wooden ox yoke to be fastened on his shoulders. Thus paraded, the captive satrap was to be scourged. He was not killed until later, when his companion officer was flayed alive. There's something to be said about the strength of testimony of people that are being tortured to get the testimony that, yeah, you should probably try other methods because you're going to get wrong stuff. It's, and it doesn't quite always get you what you want, even if the person knows it. By now the column had reached a muddy rushing river. The guides called it the River of Birds and believed it flowed northward to the mother cities. Beyond this rushing water stretched the mass of the central earth's top. Even at the water's edge, the ground was under deep snow. Tracks crisscrossed the snow where the men and horses and cattle had moved away, but no living thing was visible. Alexandros turned back here. He dared not advance the column into the ravines ahead of him, across the torrential river, while his line of march was under attack by partisans. They had been advancing nearly due east. Now he almost retraced his tracks. In this way he avoided the main ridges under winter snow. At first, he might have intended only to explore southward, and to find a region where the army could supply itself. Here the horses were underfed and dying off rapidly. To preserve the animals, they had reached stocks of fodder or grazing, but then or later the Macedonians hit upon the answer to the new warfare of attrition by the Aryan Highlanders. They would penetrate and subjugate the country section by section, thus driving the tribes from the valleys into the upper reaches. They would found cities at strategic points. These cities would be colonized, garrisoned, and walked in for defense. Out of the chain of new cities, task forces could make sallies when necessary. Meanwhile, the colonists in the city, under military protection, could cultivate the surrounding countryside and set up depots of supplies. The colonists, and this Alexandros did not see fit to explain at first, would be recruited from overage or sick soldiers, from merchants who were now following in the track of the army, and the most reliable of the subjected people. So, although under command of Macedonian officers aided by Iranian civilians, the new colonies would become mixed or international centers of population. This was a rigorous and thoroughgoing plan of occupation. It evidenced two things. First, that the Macedonians could not rely here in the east upon a preservation of the local government, as in Egypt, and had to follow a plan of conquest. Second, that Alexandros insisted upon a permanent government over these restless independent peoples. Only Kurush had attempted such a full subjugation before him, and Kurush, as he knew not, had been killed in the attempt to do so by the Ashkenazis, or Scythians, far inside Asia, to the north and east. It is easy to say that the imaginative and reckless Alexandros wished to imitate Kurush and to round out the former limits of the Iranian Empire. Actually, he seemed determined to establish his own Eurasian Commonwealth of peoples and to make it last, following the example set by Kurush of the Achaemenian tolerance and peace and combination of peoples. He had not tried to reach the limits of Iranian rule in Asia Minor. He exceeded such boundaries in the Scythian lands and in northern India, instead of availing himself here in the east of the existing populated centers. He laid down new cities where he thought that they would be necessary and peopled them in a new fashion. He never forgot his early experience with the intractable and prosperous cities of Greece proper. He wanted to construct Asiatic Athens in these fertile lands, but he did not want to duplicate here the actual Pella or Athens, or especially Sparta. In all, he ordered more than 70 cities built. When he began to edge south around the heights, he selected the site of the first of these easternmost Alexandrias on the shoulder of a valley opposite an ancient caravan city called Herat, where Magians and merchants were quartered. Here he left most of his disabled men with Semitic traders, Persian artisans, and a varied assortment of women, money changers, and a physician to look after their health. Earth walls were thrown up for temporary protection, enclosing a city of tents and stone and thatch huts. Then, with the melting of the snows, he moved south to the shores of a great lake, a great salt lake, the Helmund, where new horse herds were rounded up. Here the Macedonians discovered they were on a caravan route from the river Indus back to Persepolis. Alexandros did not try to follow out this southern transcontinental road, but he did not forget it. Years later he sent Craterus over this road of the Helmund. Instead, with the good grass of spring, Alexandros turned back toward the heart of the mountain masses, setting up his colonies and beating off resistance. This self-appointed task of subjugation occupied him for 2 years and involved him in the most dangerous kind of conflict. He had not anticipated the immensity of his Paropanisadas, nor the numbers of people therein. Actually, his course now led from the northern frontier of modern Baluchistan, through most of Afghanistan, across the Turkmen Soviet Republic and the Uzbek Republic, into a region still unnamed. Before that, he had done with it. His main army had marched more than 3,900 miles from his first site of the Paropanisadas to the point where he crossed the Khyber Pass, later into the Indus Valley.